You know how sometimes in nature you get these uh, incredible bursts of power, like a sudden storm that just erupts. It's
Mhm.
overwhelming, incredibly intense, but then poof, it's gone almost as fast as it arrived, leaving things quiet again.
Yeah, absolutely. A real flash in the pan, but powerful.
Exactly. Well, welcome everyone to the deep dive. This is where we sift through stacks of information, dig into the sources, and pull out the most potent insights for you.
Mm.
Today, we are diving deep into the Materia Medica, really focusing on one remedy, Aconite napellus, or just
Sure.
Aconite.
Oh,
And
yeah.
our main source here is the, well, extensive lectures of James Tyler Kent. We want to understand not just the what of aconite, but that unique storm it represents in health.
And the specific kind of person who experiences that storm.
Precisely. So get ready for, I think, some genuinely surprising facts and maybe a few aha moments. Our goal is to leave you really well informed about this remedy.
And that storm analogy you started with, it's actually spot on for aconite.
Yeah.
Kent himself calls it a short-acting remedy.
Short acting. How so?
Well, its effects, they don't tend to linger. They come on suddenly, often really violently, but they pass relatively quickly too.
Oh, okay.
So if someone's going to get better with aconite, it happens pretty promptly.
Yeah.
Kent says there are no chronic diseases following it.
Interesting.
He actually used that exact comparison. What
Yeah.
a great storm.
Yeah.
It comes and sweeps over and passes away.
So if aconite is this sudden, intense storm, what kind of person, experiences it? Who's the typical aconite patient? Is it just anyone who gets sick really fast?
No, and that's such a crucial point. It's usually not the frail or the chronically ill person.
Oh, okay.
Kent describes the aconite patient as typically vigorous, plethoric individuals.
Plethoric, meaning like robust, full of life.
Exactly. Robust, full-blooded people,
Hmm.
strong constitutions. Think healthy adults, or even, as Kent puts it, rugged children and infants.
Right.
These are people who generally have strong hearts, active minds, good circulation, and then, bam, they get hit hard by something suddenly.
And what kind of something triggers this? It's not just catching a little cold then.
Generally not. Kent links it to more violent exposure. Things like being caught out with deficient clothing in harsh weather,
Great.
or sudden violent changes in temperature, especially things like prolonged exposure to a cold, north, dry wind, particularly in midwinter.
That specific wind keeps coming up.
It does. But interestingly, it can also be indicated for sudden complaints that flare up from intensely hot weather in the summer.
So it's less about the temperature itself and more about the shock of the change, or the sheer intensity of the exposure.
That seems to be the idea, the suddenness, the violence of the environmental stressor.
And the reaction speed is key too, right? You said a vigorous person caught in that cold, dry air. They might be really sick even before night. It sounds incredibly fast.
It is. The onset is often described as almost instantaneous. These attacks are sudden, they're fierce, and they can hit almost any organ: brain, lungs, liver, blood, kidneys. Kent even said their sudden attacks are frightful to look upon. You get this picture of acute inflammation, but with great excitement of the circulation, violent action of the heart, a tremendous turmoil of the brain, a violent shock.
Sounds terrifying. But you also mentioned it passes quickly.
Yes, that's the other side of the coin. Despite how severe it looks, Kent noted that aconite has in its nature none of the results usually following inflammation, like chronic damage, precisely because the storm is over so quickly.
So even if the person seems like they're at death's door.
Exactly. Even if they seem threatened with a sudden and violent death, if aconite is the right remedy, the recovery, once that acute phase breaks, can be remarkably fast.
And speaking of being threatened, this brings us to the mind symptoms, doesn't it? You mentioned the turmoil of the brain. It sounds like the mental state is huge here.
Oh, absolutely central. Ken says the mind symptoms are always in bold relief. The patient feels the sheer violence of his sickness. They're in a state of great nervous irritation and excitement.
And the core of that is fear.
Overwhelming fear. Fear is depicted upon his countenance, Kent wrote. The patient feels certain they must die.
Wow.
They'll often say things like, "Doctor, there is no use. I am going to die."
That's specific.
Even more specific sometimes. Kent observed that many times he actually predicts the moment or the hour of his death.
No way. Really?
Yeah. If there's a clock nearby, they might literally point to a time and say, that's when they'll pass. It's that intense conviction fueled by terror.
Goodness. So that intense fear, this awful anxiety, great restlessness, that's the absolute signature.
That's the defining keynote, absolutely. There might be other mental symptoms like suddenly losing affection for loved ones or indifference, but honestly, they're often completely masked by this profound dread and agitation.
Right.
That's why the mental state is just paramount when you're thinking about aconite.
So it sounds like that sheer intensity just pervades everything. If there's delirium, it's not just confusion, it's intense delirium with excitement, with fear, with anxiety, and weeping, moaning, irritability, anger, even throwing things away. It all has this edge of violence and anxiety.
That's the essence of it, yes.
Yeah.
It's like everything is amplified to an extreme degree.
And the pains follow suit.
Oh, definitely. Kent describes the pains as being like knives. They are stinging, cutting, stabbing. It's so intense that the patient literally screams with pain.
Gosh.
It's not just, uncomfortable. It's portrayed as a furious, agonizing kind of suffering, like they've been completely overwhelmed by some sudden violent force.
Not subtle at all.
Not in the slightest. It's scream-inducing agony.
Okay, so we've got this picture of a storm, sudden, violent, terrifying, intense pains hitting a usually robust person. How does this play out in specific body parts, let's say the head?
Okay, well, vertigo or dizziness is pretty common.
Yeah.
A feeling of turning, whirling. And interestingly, Kent notes it can be triggered by sudden fear, and then some remnant of that fear stays. He even talks about congestion of parts as a result of fear, and the headaches, just as violent. He says they can hardly be described. They come with such violence.
What kind of pain?
Tearing, burning sensations, felt in the brain or scalp.
Mm-hmm.
And always, always with that characteristic fear, with fever, with anguish.
And the trigger is often that cold exposure again.
Often, yes.
Hmm.
From taking cold or from suppressed catarrh, a really bad cold that gets stopped up, especially from exposure to that dry, cold wind.
Okay. What about the eyes? Does the storm hit there?
It can, yes. Sudden violent inflammation. The eyes might look blood red with a lot of swelling, but typically, Kent notes, without much thick discharge, maybe just very watery mucus.
And the cause?
Again, often linked to taking cold from exposure to dry, cold winds.
Okay, now here's something important. Kent made a point about this, right? Aconite isn't just for any inflammation or fever.
Exactly. And this is such a crucial teaching point he emphasized. Aconite is not a general-purpose remedy for just any first stage of an inflammation or simply because someone has a fever.
Right. It's more specific.
Much more specific. It has to match the entire aconite patient picture. You need the suddenness, the intensity, the specific type of exposure, the characteristic thirst, the restlessness, and above all, that overwhelming fear and anxiety.
So you're not just treating a fever, you're treating the aconite state, which includes a fever.
Precisely. You need the whole constellation of symptoms. Otherwise, you'll likely choose the wrong remedy. It's about the person, not just the isolated symptom.
That makes sense. So the aconite fever itself, what does that look like?
It's typically described as a short, sharp attack. The skin tends to be bright red, not a dusky, purplish color you might see in other conditions. And crucially, Kent stresses it's not the remedy for things like blood poisoning, scarlet fever, typhoid, or what they used to call zymotic diseases, basically acute infectious diseases that spread rapidly.
So not for those deeper septic conditions.
Correct. Nor is it typically for slow, lingering fevers or intermittent fevers that come and go over time.
Got it. What else characterizes the aconite fever?
Well, there's usually significant restlessness with the fever, often sensitivity to light. And the key indicator is the response. If aconite is the right remedy, even a really violent fever can subside dramatically, often within a single night.
Wow, that fast.
That's the hallmark of its action when correctly chosen. Rapid onset, rapid resolution.
Okay, and the ears. Same story. Sudden and intense.
Yes, inflammation can come on just as suddenly there. Kent talks about throbbing, intense, cutting pains. This is especially common in children, again, after that exposure to a cold north wind.
Right.
The child often screams, clutches at their ear, and there's often an intolerance to noise. Even music might feel unbearable, like it goes through every limb.
Yeah.
It's that same heightened, anxious, irritable nerve state.
And nasal symptoms, Corzo.
Yes, if you have a sudden violent headache alongside the corsé, and it comes on strongly at night after being exposed during the day, that quick onset points towards aconite.
So how quick is sudden when we're talking about these things developing?
Well, Kent gives the example of, say, rosy, chubby, generally healthy babies. If they get that sudden exposure during the day, they could develop a full-blown coryzeb before midnight, that same day.
That is incredibly fast.
It is. And he contrasts that with other remedies like carboveg or sulfur, where symptoms might take days to build up, or even hepar, which is also for colds but tends to be slower and perhaps more suited to children who are a bit more run down to begin with.
So aconite is really that lightning strike.
Exactly. It's not the slow burn.
What about the face? What might you see there?
Often one of the first things you notice is that anxious expression. It's almost a giveaway of the internal state.
Makes sense, given the fear.
Absolutely. And there's a peculiar symptom you sometimes see. One cheek red and the other pale.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, combined with the fear, the heat, the restlessness, the suddenness, it makes for a striking picture. You might also get neuralgic pains in the face, described as feeling like hot wires or maybe numbness, crawling, or creeping sensation.
And heat.
Intense heat is common. And another odd symptom. The side of the face the person is lying on might sweat profusely, but if they turn over, that side dries up and the other side starts sweating.
Huh. Very specific. Now, you often hear aconite mentioned for things like toothache, right? How does that fit in?
It does fit, yes. It's known to be very useful for those really violent cutting, shooting toothaches.
Even in healthy teeth.
Apparently so, yes. Especially if, again, it's triggered by exposure to dry, cold winds in these robust, plethoric individuals. The pain is intense, sudden.
And thirst. You mentioned thirst with the fever.
Yes, intense thirst is very characteristic. Interestingly, Kent notes that everything might taste bitter except water. And the aconite patient longs for water, craves cold water, and importantly, it agrees well. It doesn't upset the stomach.
That thirst for cold water seems like a recurring theme.
It is, and there's another pervasive symptom Kent highlights. Burning.
Burning?
Almost everywhere, it seems. He says burning is a symptom that runs all through the remedy. In the head, along nerves, in the spine, with the fever, in the throat, stomach, liver, abdomen, urinary organs.
Wow.
It seems to be a signature sensation, wherever that aconite storm is raging internally, a sign of that intense, acute inflammation.
So this burning isn't just isolated. It's like a fiery current running through the whole picture.
That's a good way to put it. It appears fiercely wherever aconite touches, always with that characteristic intensity.
So how does that burning, that intensity, show up internally, say, in the throat?
Well, in the throat, you might see aconite indicated for burning, smarting sensations, dryness, intense redness, swelling, maybe of the tonsils or just the whole throat.
Okay.
But, and this is really critical, something Kent hammered home, those general throat symptoms on their own do not automatically mean aconite.
Right, back to the whole picture idea.
Exactly. The crucial question is always, what would make that kind of a throat an aconite case? And the answer lies in the patient.
So you need
that typically robust, plethoric person who's been exposed to that cold, dry wind, who perhaps wakes up in the middle of the night.
Okay.
With a violent, burning, tearing, sore throat. They have that intense thirst for cold water. And crucially, they're in that anxious, restless, feverish state, maybe even expressing that fear of death.
So the throat symptom is just one piece. It has to fit the entire aconite puzzle.
Precisely. The whole constitution and the mental state have to align.
Got it. What about the stomach?
Similar pattern. You find an anxious patient suffering with dreadful burning pains, tearing pains, with anxiety, with restlessness, with fever.
And the trigger, not just eating something bad.
Typically not indigestion from overeating. It's more likely from suddenly taking cold, maybe an ice bath, or sometimes even from intense summer heat exposure.
Okay.
There could be violent vomiting, maybe blood, maybe bile, just awful retching. And again, that craving for bitter or pungent things, even though food tastes bitter, except for water, which they crave and tolerate well.
And further down, liver, abdomen.
Aconite can be indicated in sudden violent inflammation of the liver. Again, tearing pains, burning, and those awful tortures of anxiety, constantly moving. Fear of death, red face, glassy eyes, great thirst. The whole package.
It's a consistent picture.
Very consistent. In the abdomen, generally, you might see shooting, burning, stinging pains, typically after cold exposure. It covers acute inflammatory conditions of the abdominal organs, even severe dysentery with passage of almost pure blood, and a little slime.
And I bet they predict death in those cases, too.
Kent notes that they often do, yes. It's a recurring theme with that level of intensity and fear.
And the urinary system.
Again, acute inflammatory conditions. Urine might be bloody, scanty, suppressed altogether, or there might be retention inability to urinate.
Retention. Interesting.
Yes, Kent actually called it one of the best remedies for retention in the newborn, often needed right after birth
Right.
due to the shock of the delivery process.
Wow. Okay.
And you get burning pains with urination, and the urine itself is typically hot, dark, and red.
Okay, let's shift to the genital system. How does the aconite storm manifest there? For men first, maybe.
For men, it's less common, perhaps, but Kent mentions its use for very sudden, violent cases of orchitis. That's inflammation of the testes, specifically arising from cold exposure in those plethoric, robust men.
But not for other common issues down there.
Generally not indicated for things like common gonorrheal inflammation, according to Kent. It's more about that sudden, cold-induced inflammation in the right type of person.
And for women, you mentioned it's more frequent.
Yes, Ken thought aconite was more frequently indicated in women and children. He attributed this partly to women's naturally sympathetic nature and sensitivity, suggesting they're perhaps more prone to complaints arising from nervous shock, from fear.
Ah, fear again.
Fear again. He specifically mentions that fear can sometimes cause uterine or ovarian inflammation or even trigger an abortion.
And aconite could help there.
If given early enough, Kent believed aconite could potentially check an abortion that was brought on purely by a sudden fright or shock.
That's quite specific.
Very. And another strong indicator, a pregnant woman who becomes convinced she will die during childbirth and predicts it.
Wow, that fear of death prediction again.
Exactly. You also see those characteristic pains, stitching, burning, tearing pains, arising after fear or some sudden intense emotion.
What about after childbirth?
Yes, it has uses there too. After a tedious and difficult parturition, a really long, hard labor, it might be indicated for violent after pains, especially if accompanied by fever and restlessness.
Okay.
Also for uterine hemorrhage, specifically with bright red blood and fear of death.
Bright red blood seems key.
Often, yes, in aconite hemorrhages.
Yeah.
And it can be useful in the puerperal state the time right after birth for issues arising from taking cold if they are non-septic. Things like breast soreness or sudden suppression of milk.
But not if there's infection involved.
Correct. Kent specifically excludes its use for suppression of the lochia, the normal post-birth discharge, or for puerperal fever, as those usually imply a septic condition, which aconite doesn't typically address.
And for the newborns themselves, you mentioned urine retention.
Yes, very commonly indicated for that retention of urine right after birth due to shock.
Yeah.
Also potentially for breathing difficulties, especially if the baby had a tough time during delivery, maybe involving forceps.
Okay. Now, croup. Aconite and croup often get mentioned together. Is it a go-to remedy, or does it still need that specific aconite picture?
Well, Kent called it a great routine croup remedy, but immediately warned it was often misused.
Ah, because people forget the specifics.
Precisely. It's indicated for sudden croup, developing rapidly in those robust, plethoric children, usually after exposure to dry, cold wind.
And the timing.
Characteristically, the child often wakes from their first sleep maybe between 9 and 11 p.m. in distress. They might grasp at the throat, have a violent, croupy, choking cough with a hoarse bark.
How does it differ from other croup remedies?
Kent contrasts it with hepar, which tends to develop more slowly, and with skunja, which he described as less inflammatory, lacking the intense fever and anguish of aconite. Spongia croup is typically very dry, whereas aconite might have a little watery discharge or be dry.
So aconite croup is?
It involves true inflammation of the larynx, but also spasms of the larynx, and it all comes on with that characteristic aconite rapidity and intensity.
Got it. Okay, lungs and breathing next.
Yes, aconite is described as being full of disturbances of respiration. Some presentations can resemble asthma. You might see dyspnoea, difficulty breathing arising from capillary bronchitis or intense cardiac excitement, or simply from fear itself, especially in nervous women.
What does the breathing look like?
Short, labored, anxious, quick. The mucous membranes often feel very dry. The patient might sit up straight and can hardly breathe, maybe grasping at their throat, wanting all coverings thrown off.
And the general state?
Hot skin, that great thirst for cold water, great fear, great restlessness. They might break into a profuse sweat, but still feel incredibly hot underneath.
What about the pulse?
Interestingly, it might start out feeling very weak, like a thread, but then become full and bounding as the fever peaks.
Any cough? Or lung specifics?
Often a dry cough,
Yeah.
sometimes vomiting with a cough. If there's expectoration, like a pneumonia, the blood is typically cherry red, bright red, again, that bright red blood, not rusty like you might see with bryonia, or roostox.
Pneumonia, too.
Yes, Kent noted its potential usefulness in pneumonia, often mentioning the upper half of the left lung as a common site when aconite is indicated. There can also be sensations described as feeling like hot steam or warm blood rushing into the parts or just flushes of heat.
And finally, the spine and limbs. Any aconite signatures there?
Yes, things like tearing pains down the spine, a stiff neck, a really peculiar sensation, crawling in the spine like insects, often after getting cold.
Crawling insects.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. In the limbs, you might see trembling hands or creeping pains in the fingers, often very cold feet, but hot palms. It's indicated in acute rheumatic conditions, again, coming on suddenly after cold exposure, with high fever and that typical anxious restlessness.
What about nerves specifically?
Ken called it a wonderful remedy for neuritis, nerve inflammation, in those plethoric individuals, characterized by numbness and tingling along the nerve pathways, especially superficial nerves. It involves inflammation of the nerve sheaths, coupled with that general nervous excitability and excessive restlessness.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground, from the mind down to the toes. So bringing it all together, what's the absolute takeaway? What does this all mean for understanding aconite?
I think the core message that Think Kent really stressed is that for any of these complaints, no matter where they show up in the body, it does not make much difference where the disorder occurs. We must have the aconite patient.
It always comes back to the person.
Always. The overall picture. The appearance of the face, the mind symptoms, the restlessness, the intensity, those general features are paramount. They're what you look for first. It's about recognizing that whole unified state of the individual caught in that sudden, terrifying storm.
Right, and aconite deals with that storm. But what happens after? Does it prevent future storms?
No, that's another key point. Aconite handles the acute crisis beautifully when indicated, but Kent states it has no power over that tendency for similar attacks to happen again. It doesn't address the underlying susceptibility.
So something else might be needed long term.
Often, yes. He frequently mentions sulfur as a remedy that often follows aconite well, particularly to address those chronic tendencies or constitutional weaknesses that aconite, being an acute remedy, doesn't touch.
And sometimes other remedies are needed even right after aconite.
Sometimes, yes. If the aconite clears the most violent phase, but there's still a lingering something, other acute remedies like arnica, belladonna, ipecac, bryonia, or silica might be needed to fully resolve the attack.
Interesting. And what if someone takes too much aconite or takes it when it's not quite right?
Kent suggests that if aconite is given inappropriately too many doses, too strong a potency, certain other remedies like coffee or nux vomica can sometimes help counteract the overreaction and help the patient settle.
Okay, so to recap the essence, aconite's unique signature is that really sudden, violent, but ultimately short-lived storm. It happens in a generally vigorous person, and it's completely dominated by that intense fear, anxiety, and restless agitation.
That's a perfect summary. It's a snapshot of a very specific acute state of suffering. It's definitely not a general cure-all.
It really highlights how specific these remedy pictures can be.
It does.
Yeah.
And maybe that leaves us with a thought to ponder. Given how incredibly precise and interconnected this aconite patient picture is, how might really understanding these kinds of detailed patient-remedy relationships change how we approach personalized care, especially for acute conditions?
Moving beyond just chasing isolated symptoms.
Exactly. Thinking about recognizing the unique pattern, the whole person experiencing the illness, even in those sudden acute moments.
That's definitely something to think about. It shows there's such depth when we look at these remedies, not just as lists of symptoms, but as these intricate portraits of human experience and sickness. What other remedies hold similar depths? Lots to explore. We'll see you on the next deep dive.